Hello everyone and welcome to another Fara carry guide. Today we're going to talk about the Graf Zeppelin and specifically the third revision that Wargaming has currently done. There's two new Graf Zeppelins, GZ1 and 2 again, but it's the third time round, so technically speaking it's like the 5th or 6th or 7th variation of the carry they've done. And this is going to be a smaller video today without much more gameplay, and we're just going to talk about the stats, what they changed, what's good and what's bad. So let's go in and have a quick peek. Here we can see our Graf Zeppelin, and it's beautiful as always. However, specifics, we now have, as we said, two versions, GZ Test 1, GZ Test 2. Now the Test 1, the most important element, is the modules, its strike. The GZ Test 2, we have fighters and AP dive bombers. Some big differences. The last revision that I said was good, and you can check in the video list, was the Graf Zeppelin with Tier 7 fighters and 3 torpedo bombers. The torpedo bombers were deep water, and they've changed the graphics now, as we can see here. So as up above, you can see that they've changed the UI to signify what is a deep water torpedo bomber and what's an AP dive bomber, because you can see the little icon changes. Fair enough, whatever, Wargaming. So the GZ2 keeps his fighters, although they've basically down-tiered them to Tier 7. I don't like the way that Wargaming is going about this, because it seems to me that they are happy with the fighters being Tier 7. That's not to say they're bad. They're Tier 7 fighters of the Graf Zeppelin with dogfighting expert, and it bugs me that you need to use the captain skill to make them viable, because anyone who doesn't know that is going to use it and go, well, these are terrible, but if you use a dogfighting expert, then all of a sudden it becomes good. That's not good game philosophy, in my opinion. You're down tier into Tier 7. Now, they can fight the Shikaku fighters just fine. They can fight the Enterprise fighters just fine. But in a double Lexington, you can't really compete because he has more, he's beefier and tankier. But the issue I'm getting at here is that when you go into ranked gameplay or competitive gameplay, the fighters just don't hold up, because you will be against 8, 9, 10 things in randoms, and you will be against organized AA, the Tier 8 bracket, and the Tier 7 planes with the lower health pool simply can't compete. This is just like the Enterprise all over again. And the ship won't be used, which is very frustrating. And currently we still haven't had a fighter setup CV where we've had at least 3 fighters and some variation of bombers, like the Shikaku's 312. So I'm kind of bummed out that they're going to go down the Tier 7 method for fighters, because that's all they're doing at the moment. They're not trying other techniques. They're not trying bumping the health or bumping the ammo. They're keeping the stats as they are. Low health points, low damage, low ammunition, that type of stuff, but keeping the speed. I'm not exactly a fan of this, but whatever. As far as the armor piercing dive bombs, we've gone away from the elliptical pattern, which was good in that you could guarantee all the bombs would hit on a target, because you could get the reticle all over. And we've now gone for a circle drop pattern for similar to high explosive bombers went. Now, we also keep, I believe, the 3-second delay on the bomb hits, so it's easier to click on the target, or manual as well. But the problem is, because of the round circle, it means that when we're using armor-piercing dive bombs as our only damaging source, we can do damage to cruisers, battleships, carriers. Fair enough. We can't really damage destroyers because it will overpin them and a bomb will go straight through. But because it's a round circle and the ship is just kind of a straight line and there's a circle around it, you're gonna miss bombs no matter what you do. There is no pinpoint precision drop. That's fine for high explosive bombers, because ultimately you're only going for the fire effect and maybe disable some modules. But when it's armor piercing, you want as many bombs to connect as possible, and at the moment this isn't a skilled enough approach. Given that there's a little bit of a delay, or it feels like it when I was testing it, I'm not a fan of the armor piercing in a circle, and I'm not a fan of only dive bombers as the only source of damage. Now, last time we had the Graf Zeppelin with the torpedo bombers, we had 3 torpedo bomb waves similar to the Graf Zeppelin Test 1. The thing was, though, you could attack battleships, carriers, and most cruisers in terms of depth. There was a few Tier 6s here and there and whatnot that you couldn't torpedo bomb, and the destroyers were too shallow as well, so you can torpedo them as well. And that was sort of okay-ish. But the carrier fundamentally was a broken Tier 8, and it was very weak. But at the same time, the torpedo bombers, the 15 of them, are so powerful that its striking power of more than a Tier 10 carrier. The Graf Zeppelin with 15 torpedo bombers could absolutely smash a Tier 10 battleship that was long enough for all the bombs to connect, and it could one-shot it. That is clearly far too powerful. There needs to be some sort of middle ground. I was thinking, instead of the torpedo bombers alpha strike of 10,000 damage, we can reduce that. We can reduce that to like 7,500. It doesn't need to be such a huge Alpha Strike, and then you can give it some other functionality, give it a dive bomber. But no, Wargaming has gone the completely wrong direction and gone with the Strike CV. This is it's going to be compared to the Strike Lexington. Because there are no fighters, which is an incredibly selfish way of gameplay. You can't support your team, you can't deny South, you can't go scouting with your fighters, you can't prevent bombing attacks, and you're then reliant on you attacking yourself, which is just the wrong way to play carrier as a support ship, because you're giving it no support options. The other problem is the torpedo bombers in this variation, because now you're giving them dive bombers and torpedo bombers. The last version I just said was ridiculously overpowered, even if it was considered a tier 10 because it can one-shot. Now you're giving it dive bombers, and the simple tragic fact is the torpedo bombers are even worse than the last variant, because you can only now attack, as it says here on the UI just up there, you can only attack carriers and battleships. So if you go into a game, you know there's going to be one enemy carrier to mirror you, and it's very difficult to attack the enemy carrier because of defensive fire, and the enemy may have fighters. I mean, he has to complete idiot of the carrier not to have fighters or not to kind of stop you. So you're not going to be killing the enemy carrier, especially with defensive fires, which means you're going after battleships, which means you've gone from a ship that could only not attack destroyers, so you could hit 75% of the targets and that's it, to now you can only attack 25% of the targets in the game, battleships, and nothing else. You have to be reliant on your bombers to hit the other classes. Like the cruisers and destroyers, and the armor piercing ones are not going to hurt the destroyers. Plus, both the bombers are circle patterns now, so the armor piercing dive bombs aren't going to be particularly accurate and get as many connections. They'll hit hard, but you're not going to get as many bombs, and I prefer a skill setup where you can hit more bombs on the target. The high explosive dive bombers with the circle pattern, however, are fine, and the fact that the carrier has two sources of damage over time, firing flooding, is also nice. But the fact that the torpedo bombers are so gimped, they keep their massive alpha strike, but only against selective targets, is the wrong way to go about balancing the ship. It needs to be a versatile ship. It needs to, with skill, be able to hit any ship class, or mildly inconvenience them or reset a cap or something. But the inability to hit cruisers is stupid. The inability to hit destroyers, well, like, with the torpedo bombers is fine, with the dive bombers you can, but ultimately you have no fighters, so you have to go for wherever you target you can, and it's highly predictable, this shit, because the enemy CV is going to know, oh, well, I know this guy has no fighters, so he can only go after battleships. The dive bombers are almost, inconsequential on what damage they can, so I will, there's a predictable amount of gameplay, and there's no flexibility. It's a one-trick pony, and it's really, really bad. Wargaming, if you're listening, don't do this. This is really stupid. You almost got it last time with the 2 fighters, 3 torpedo bombers, the deep water, and okay, they couldn't hit destroyers. Honestly, it's so easy to fix this. Reduce the alpha damage of the torpedo bombers, which is 10,500 damage. Bump that down to around the 7,000 marker, so that it's not massively overpowerful in its hitting strength, right? And then maybe give it a dive bomber, so it's a 2-3-1, and the 15 torpedo bombers at 7,500 as deep water, so they can't hit destroyers. Let them hit cruisers, battleships, and carriers. Give it 1 dive bomber with a circle pattern that's high explosive, right? And then now all of a sudden you can inconvenience the destroyers with the drop pattern. You can high explosive and that type of stuff. You can also do flooding with the torpedo bombers, and it's not ridiculously overpowered, which it shouldn't be, because it shouldn't be able to one-shot, and then it's fine, and you don't have to worry about cross-dropping destroyers. Alternatively, change it. I don't know why you're stepping to the 5 torpedo bombers per 1 plane wave. Drop that down to 3 in some way, and keep the alpha strike, or lower the alpha strike, or get rid of deep water dive torpedoes entirely, because I really don't like the gimmick of deep water dive torpedo bombers. You can reduce the amount of damage that you do, or you can reduce the number of planes in the wave. But in the current setup that you're doing, this is horrendous. It is the worst carrier I've played at the Graf Zeppelin, and I don't want to play this ship. The 2-fire 3 torpedo bomber setup from the previous instance, that was good, and it actually, believe it or not, had some viability and ranked and competitive, because the 15 torpedo bombers could brute force their way through extremely high AA ships such as North Carolina in that sense, and it can sort of work, but the alpha damage is too high, and the 5 plane waves is too few. You can go with the 6th, you can throw a dive bomb there, you can go 2-fighter, 3 torpedo bomber, 1 dive bomber wave. Or alternatively, you can also, is it so hard to add a fighter group setup, like a second flight control module? Give us 3 fighters, maybe 1 or 2 torpedo bombers and 1 dive bomber. Again, we're going round in circles here. I say this every video. this is the wrong way to go about it. It's just bad. And hopefully something comes out of this. But it's immensely frustrating because they went from a ship that was nearly playable and fun to a ship that's not playable and fun. In terms of captain skills and how I play it, the strike CV, as I say, is selfish, so you can go with the secondaries as a self-defense mechanism, and it's gimmicky, and I don't like it. Another thing that's very irritating is all these ship setups. Playing with torpedo bombers and without torpedo bombers is two completely different captain setups, so you have to kind of redo your captain every once in a while. But ultimately, when it comes to captain skills, if you're using torpedo bombers, it's actually pretty good to go with a concealment expert and to play a standard kind of carrier without going with the manual fire control for secondary armor. And you don't take that, and you go with air supremacy, AFT, and concealment as some of the latter skills. And then if you go with torpedo bombers, you would take the torpedo armor and expertise. If you're not going with torpedo bombers and you're using only dive bombers and fighters, then you basically bump up the ability of the fighters and the dogfighting expert, and you would increase your secondary guns. I've done videos on the captain builds before, and then when Wargaming finally gets a final setup, we'll do it again. But ultimately, I don't want this video to go on very long. Wargaming, this is a bad setup. Everyone else, if you're not paying attention to the Graf Zeppelin, currently it's even worse. The strike setup is cancerous. The American carriers need to have their strike taken away. It needs to be more balanced. They have to be at least one fighter group. It's the wrong way to go. And honestly, I think Wargaming's maybe trying to balance two sides of a spectrum here. They're trying the all attack and somewhere in between they haven't given us the fire setup, and it's demoralizing because everything that Wargaming has done with carriers has been bad. The year of the carrier 2017 has been all terrible. Which I don't want to go into in great detail, but the fact is they remove manual attacks from tier 4-5 was bad. The alternate mouse controls were bad. Any UI tweaking hasn't really done anything. If anything, the game UI is more laggy. The Enterprise didn't get its second module setup that they said might happen to make it viable in a sort of competitive scenario. It's still only 2 fighters, which means it's not good and competitive, which, you know, I really want it to be, but it's not. And this whole debacle with the Graf Zeppelin and their inability to get one really good setup. Of the 7 setups of the Graf Zeppelin that we have had so far to date, none of them have been good. Not even one of them has been, oh wow, this is really nice. The last variation we had, where we had the torpedo bombers and the 2 fighters and the massive OP-ness, it was bad. The fighters are still bad on the low and the health. The torpedo bombers are still too powerful, but at the same time pretty weak. And the inability to hit all the targets or inconvenience them is a flaw. Come on, Wargaming, you can do better than this. Anyway, I look forward to the next round of Graf Zeppelin ships, and maybe they'll actually do something decent here. Alright, thanks for watching, guys. I hope this was informative. And we'll see you next time for something more positive.